if you're running sprints and you're using user stories and you're using story points, and this is pretty typical, we get a question of how do we handle unfinished work? Now, this is work that is in flight, partially done. Well, what do you do with those? Welcome back to another episode of Master Engine Call. Today, we're going to talk about how do you handle unfinished work. At the beginning of the sprint, we committed to work. At the end of the sprint, we figure out what is not done, right? So all work should be done by the end of the sprint, but most often than not, things doesn't go the way you wanted it to go. So what do? How do you handle those stories? For those stories that you have not touched, you haven't got the time to get to it, that's pretty easy. You take that story, move it into your backlog, and then ask the product owner to see if it's still of highest importance. Now, if it is, usually then we will take that and move it into the next sprint. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The harder one is stories that are in flight, half done. What do you do with those? So there's two methods, method A and method B. So let's talk about method A. So method A is basically for any in-flight, basically look at the stories. It's half done, right? So the half that is not done moves back into the backlog to be decided whether it is still critical or not. Now, usually it is. So what do you mean by the stuff that is not done? Well, the stuff that's in terms of tasks. The task goes along with it. Between the sprint, now you have the stuff that is done. So you only have that. Now, tools sometimes dictate how you act with those stories. Some tools require us to split the stories up. When you split the stories, it's going to ask you for the sizing of it. It's going to say, well, what's the size? What's the size that is not done that you're moving to the next sprint? Now, method B is my preferred way of doing things, which is if it's not done, you don't get credit for it. It's not done. So there's no reason to try to figure out what's left, what's not left. We kind of know what's there. Move the whole story to the next sprint. Now, some tools cannot handle that. Some tools will basically fall apart when it comes to metrics, when it comes to doing reporting in terms of how many stories was committed, how many stories are done. It doesn't know how to handle that. There are tools such as Jira, which I kind of prefer. It pretty much has what we call like a snapshot, capture data before and after and in between. And I love that because it allows us to basically say, it's not done. Team, you don't get credit for it. Therefore, we're going to move it out. It will go into the next sprint. Usually, it's still the highest priority. Then we'll work on it. Now, whenever that sprint complete, teams get credit for those story points. Why do we do that? So I prefer method B is because we're promoting teams to say you have to finish everything that you committed to. Pretty much you try to, right? We're committing to working together as one to try our best to complete everything that we need to complete. I don't need to estimate it again because there's no reason, there's no value in trying to estimate what's left, what's not. Really, there isn't. Method A will basically say, you give credits, in my mind, it shows that you're giving credits to unfinished work. Why? We don't need those things, right? Because on the long run, if I'm looking for training, if I'm looking for ways to say, on average, how much that has my team can do, then pretty much I can look on average, right? We're looking for like 10 data points at a bare minimum, and then you do what we call, get to a 95% or 90% confidence interval. Now, those requires plugging in the velocity of sprints. So in the long run, it still balances out. That's why I like method B. So there's no reason for me to do that. So again, it's extra work I don't think I need, and it promotes something that really I don't want to promote. I want my best team. I want my team to try their best to get things done. Now, people will argue with us and say, hey, it's about capacity. Well, capacity and your story pointing should be totally different. Capacity is capacity. So how do we handle unfinished work like that? Really simple, right? You go to sprint planning. In the next sprint planning, we know unfinished work. We roughly kind of guess how much days that we needed that is out of that sprint that is needed to finish that work. Then we just take in the work as is. We got half done work, taking the next one, and then say, are we full? Simple as that. There's no magic around it. It's real simple. You don't have to go through lengths of things to do. You don't have to do calculate additional things and things like that. Now, there are tools that basically says, well, we're going to recalculate by hours. Again, this is not something I promote. I do not use hours to go and try and estimate capacity. Shown you my calculation before in my previous video. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You don't need those details. You can achieve what you needed by using simple ways of doing things. So method A, method B, I prefer method B because it provides us the true notion of process, tools, as a secondary to people and interaction. So most often I see that tools are directing how we do work, right? Tools are forcing us to go down a specific path. And it's because sometimes if you look deep enough, it's the tools and how they're designed. It's how the developers create the tools. It doesn't specifically handle what we truly want. So therefore, I'm always about people and interactions over process and tools. Process and tools should be secondary to our people interactions. So let's make our people interactions as easy as possible when we're dealing with work like this. So that's it, folks. Method A, method B. Your choice. I prefer method B. Bye.